California, in the 1970s, was a picture of warmth and comfort. Streets shimmered under golden sunlight, children rode bicycles through quiet suburbs, and neighbors shared lemonade under backyard oaks. The air carried the promise of prosperity and peace. Yet, beneath the golden calm, something darker stirred. A string of odd break-ins crept through Sacramento County, too careful, too calculated to be random. Pets went missing, windows were found pried open, and back gates unlatched. People whispered of a man watching from the shadows, a ghost slipping between hedges. The city that once symbolized freedom began locking itself in. Night fell heavier each evening, and the suburban dream started to feel like a fragile illusion about to shatter. First, police called them burglaries, small crimes by a prowler seeking jewelry and cash. But soon, horror replaced petty theft. Families awoke to flashlights blinding their eyes, the sound of ropes tightening, the whisper of a masked intruder giving calm, chilling orders. Victims described a small man, agile, controlled, his voice eerily polite as he terrorized. The community descended into panic. Women slept with guns beside their pillows. Men kept watch until dawn. The peace of California's golden glow dimmed beneath the shadow of a faceless hunter who seemed to know everyone's secrets. Detectives began to notice strange patterns connecting the attacks. The prowler always struck in clusters, often near creeks or bike trails, vanishing into the night without a trace. He left behind no fingerprints, no footprints, nothing but the echo of terror. Victims spoke of heavy breathing, muttered words, and cruel taunts that suggested he studied their lives long before entering their homes. Law enforcement from neighboring counties pooled resources, but frustration mounted. This wasn't random, it was ritual. Each assault seemed rehearsed, the movements methodical. Investigators realized they were facing someone far more intelligent than the average criminal. The man they sought didn't simply break in, he orchestrated fear itself. They called him the East Area Rapist, though his crimes would eventually span hundreds of miles and decades of dread. He stalked like a predator who treated neighborhoods as hunting grounds. He knew when husbands left for work, when dogs were chained, which windows were cracked open for the night breeze. He parked blocks away, slipped through yards, and memorized every escape route. Victims later recalled finding shoelaces tied into perfect knots or missing photos from drawers. Small signs of his surveillance. The sense of safety collapsed. Even the police felt watched. Officers would find footprints behind their own fences, taunting them. Despite dozens of sketches and tips, every lead went cold. The attacker moved like smoke, unseen but omnipresent. Fear grew not just of his brutality, but of his patience. He wasn't acting on impulse, he was executing a plan, step by step, as if playing a game no one else knew the rules to. As months turned to years, the psychological toll spread wider than any physical wound. Neighborhoods once filled with laughter now echoed with alarm systems and silence. People nailed windows shut, bought guard dogs, and slept in shifts. The media warned citizens to stay alert, but no one felt safe. Couples stopped going out at night. Children weren't allowed to walk alone. The idea of home became fragile. Survivors described lifelong trauma, the sound of footsteps outside forever haunting them. Fear transformed communities into fortresses, yet the killer still slipped through cracks, mocking every precaution. Each new attack reignited old panic. The police were drowning in reports, but the more they searched, the more the killer seemed to vanish into thin air. Journalists struggled to capture the magnitude of his terror. They called him the East Area Rapist, but as his crime spread south, a new name emerged: the original Night Stalker. The changing monikers reflected a growing realization this wasn't one spree, but a reign. He evolved, adapting faster than investigators could react. Each region believed they faced a new monster, not knowing it was the same shadow shifting through California's heart. The press sensationalized every new clue, but even fear began to feel repetitive. Residents of Sacramento, Contra Costa, Ventura, and Orange counties shared the same nightmare: an invisible man who studied, struck, and disappeared. Every creak in the floorboards became a possible omen. The legend of the masked invader had become as real as the morning headlines. Among the exhausted detectives stood a few who refused to give up. They pinned maps across their office walls, connecting red dots that bled across the state. One detective, Paul Holes, years later would carry this obsession into the next century. But back then, technology failed them. DNA evidence was primitive. Communication between departments fragmented, and pressure from terrified citizens unbearable. The killer exploited their chaos. He anticipated patrol patterns, taunted victims, and left behind bizarre phone calls that froze blood. Police chiefs rotated, task forces dissolved, and families begged for closure. The case was collapsing under its own weight. Still, somewhere within the chaos, a few men and women quietly vowed they would not let this phantom win. The crimes escalated. Where once he burglarized, he now killed. Couples were found murdered in their homes, bound in the same signature knots once used in earlier assaults. The brutality was shocking, yet coldly consistent. He never lost control, never rushed. It was as if he had turned murder into an art of precision. Police realized they were no longer dealing with a rapist. They were facing a serial killer. Fear turned to hysteria. Public meetings filled with citizens demanding action, yet no one could name the ghost tormenting them. Each crime scene felt like a cruel puzzle piece designed to mock the investigators who tried to fit the picture together. The Golden State sun now rose on communities shrouded in grief. The myth that only single women were targeted shattered when couples became victims. The killer adapted again, learning to overpower two people at once. He tied husbands first, placed dishes on their backs, warning that any movement would cause noise and death. Then he attacked the women while the men lay helpless. The psychological cruelty was almost ritualistic, feeding on power and humiliation. Detectives reading the report struggled not to imagine the scenes. California's heartland had become a theater of controlled terror. Every couple in the suburbs lived under the same rule: don't sleep through the night. Somewhere out there, the man who thrived on fear listened to police scanners, laughing quietly to himself. By the early 1980s, the case had consumed every department it touched. Detectives sifted through hundreds of suspects, ex-military men, drifters, even local police officers. Every time they thought they had him, alibis or inconclusive evidence destroyed the lead. The killer's mastery of escape bordered on supernatural. Yet his control was beginning to wane. A few survivors reported mistakes, unplanned noises, shaking hands, a flash of anger. Still, nothing concrete emerged. The frustration was unbearable. Files grew thicker, witnesses aged, and the manhunt turned desperate. Years of investigation led to nowhere but dead ends, the only certainty being that the monster remained free among them, hidden behind an ordinary life. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished. The attacks stopped, the calls ceased, and the night returned to silence. But it wasn't peace, it was paralysis. Police departments didn't close the case, they simply ran out of places to look. People whispered theories: he was dead, imprisoned, or simply bored. Detectives couldn't move on. Every open window and every news report about new crimes elsewhere stirred old doubts. He had disappeared before, they warned, and he could do it again. Time marched on, but for those who lived through the fear, every creak in the dark still sounded like his return. By the 1996, the East Area rapist and original Night Stalker had become cold cases. Old legends whispered about in police academies. But technology was evolving faster than anyone imagined. DNA evidence, once theoretical, now became a tool capable of unlocking old ghosts. Investigators pulled samples from long-stored evidence, hoping science could do what humans could not. When results came back, a revelation shattered decades of confusion. The rapist and the Night Stalker were the same man. Two monsters merged into one. The phrase Golden State Killer was born, a name heavy with both irony and dread. The hunt was back on, this time with the power of science guiding the chase. Detectives began to re-examine everything. DNA profiles connected murders across counties, transforming what had seemed like isolated tragedies into a single, terrifying timeline. Forensic databases grew, but still no match appeared. The killer's DNA existed like a ghost in the machine, present but nameless. Retired officers returned to help. Journalists reignited the public's obsession. Documentaries, podcasts, and books recounted every detail, keeping the case alive in the public imagination. The story became more than crime. It became a riddle, challenging technology, history, and human perseverance. For the first time, investigators had proof that one man had evaded justice for decades. The only question that remained: who was he? The internet age brought new possibilities. Amateur sleuths, retired detectives, and geneticists formed an unlikely alliance. Forensic genealogy emerged, a method that could trace family trees through shared DNA. Investigators uploaded the Golden State Killer's profile to public genealogy sites, searching for distant relatives. It was a shot in the dark, but desperation had long replaced doubt. Slowly, a web of genetic connections began forming, a lineage stretching through generations, narrowing with each clue. What decades of footwork failed to uncover, science now whispered from code. The killer's identity was finally within reach, hidden not in evidence bags, but in his bloodline. In 2018, after more than 40 years of fear and frustration, the unthinkable happened. The DNA trail led to a quiet suburb in Citrus Heights, California. Investigators watched an elderly man watering his lawn, unaware that the walls around him were closing in. His name was Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer who had once sworn to protect the very communities he terrorized. Detectives retrieved DNA from his discarded trash and confirmed him. The monster who haunted California's nights had lived among them, retired, hidden behind the facade of normal life. When the arrest came, DeAngelo barely resisted. The hunt was over. The arrest stunned the nation. Neighbors spoke of a kind old man who kept to himself, never suspecting the darkness buried beneath his calm exterior. Survivors, now gray-haired and aged by years of trauma, wept as they watched the news. Detectives who had chased shadows for decades finally saw a face. Courtrooms filled with reporters, families, and those who had long prayed for justice. The man who had once been an unstoppable predator now appeared frail, trembling, his voice barely audible. But for those who remembered his crimes, his silence spoke volumes. The monster was mortal after all. During the trial, victims confronted him, recounting their pain with courage that transcended time. Some forgave, others demanded explanation, but all reclaimed power stolen from them. DeAngelo, expressionless, muttered apologies from a wheelchair. The courtroom carried decades of grief, anger, and resilience. When the verdict arrived, sentencing him to life without parole, it wasn't celebration, it was closure. The Golden State Killer, once the embodiment of terror, was now a prisoner of his own past. His capture marked not just the end of a manhunt, but a triumph of science, perseverance, human endurance over unimaginable evil. In the years since, California has healed slowly. The name Joseph DeAngelo is etched into history, not for infamy alone, but as proof that time and truth can catch even the most elusive shadows. The story of the Golden State Killer stands as both tragedy and lesson. Evil can wear an ordinary face, but justice, though delayed, never truly dies. Survivors rebuilt their lives, detectives found peace in closure, and a new generation learned how science can bring light to even the darkest corners of memory. The whisper that once haunted California's nights has finally faded, leaving behind not fear, but strength.